Your brain hates uncertainty, so it invents. Okay, so basically, your brain is a prediction machine trying to stay a step ahead of reality. That's not poetry, it's metabolism. Uncertainty costs energy. Every time the world surprises you, your nervous system throws resources at the mistake. Neuroscientists call that mismatch a prediction error. Too many errors, and your brain is working overtime, like refreshing a laggy stream. So the brain's strategy is simple. Predict hard, correct lightly. Think of it like autocomplete for your senses. You don't see a raw feed. You see your brain's best guess, continuously corrected by incoming data. In other words, perception is a controlled hallucination that's kept honest by what hits your eyes and ears. When the incoming signal is strong and clear, your brain's guesses stay tethered. When the signal weakens, your prior expectations, your priors, grab the wheel. Here's where it gets weird. Priors aren't abstract ideas. They're layered probabilities your brain learned from experience. Faces are likely. Voices tend to come from people. Shadows move because something caused them. That's why a bush becomes a burglar at 2 a.m., then a bush again at 2:01. The simple version is data pushes down, priors push up, and what you experience lives in a tug-of-war. I once walked to the kitchen at night and saw a figure standing in the hallway. Adrenaline hit like a jump scare. I froze, looked harder, and the intruder melted into a coat on a chair. That micro-story isn't embarrassing, it's the motto in the wild. Low light weakens data. Fatigue lowers your threshold for error. Stress cranks up the weight on threat-related priors. Result? A hallucination like that feels absolutely real for a heartbeat. Humans are biased toward detecting faces and agents. We have special machinery tuned for faces that fires even with minimal clues. 2 dots in a line, a car's grill, a power outlet. That's pareidolia. Seeing meaningful patterns in noise, and his bigger cousin, apophenia, spotting connections that aren't there. Evolution baked this in because the cost of a false positive, thinking a vine is a snake, is usually cheaper than a false negative, missing an actual snake. Better to flinch 100 times than die once. Psychologists also link this to hyperactive agency detection. Under uncertainty, the mind favors someone over something as a fast protective bet. Nobody explains us right, but it's not that the brain is gullible, it's that it's conservative with threats. Under ambiguity, your threat priors win by default. That's why creaking pipes are footsteps, why your name appears to whisper in the wind, why a flicker in the corner of your eye becomes a watcher. In a dim corridor, your visual system picks up edges and motion but loses color and detail. Your hearing prioritizes sudden changes over steady noise. Your interoception, the sense of your own body, is louder when you're keyed up. All those channels produce the same story. There's something. In predictive processing terms, prior precision on agent ramps up as sensory precision drops, so the agent-shaped guess wins. Here's the counterintuitive part. Accuracy isn't the brain's primary goal. Usefulness is. Perception evolved to guide action. If a slightly wrong perception keeps you safe faster, the brain takes the trade. That's why, in ambiguous conditions, the ghost generator isn't broken. It's overconfident in useful directions. Researchers frame it like this: perception equals prediction plus correction. The correction depends on how precise the sensory input seems. Precision is the brain's confidence in a signal, like turning the volume knob on errors. In the dark, the knob turns down for the world and up for your expectations. Scenes become sketches, your mind colors them in. Let's put stakes on this. The hallucination cocktail is low light plus fatigue plus stress. Low light strips detail. Fatigue reduces inhibitory control, your brain's brakes, letting spontaneous activity pop through. Stress floods you with noradrenaline, which sharpens alertness but biases attention toward potential threats. Add isolation, and you lose reality checks from other people. You can see how a cold room, a late hour, and a creepy story align perfectly. With false alarms, here's what most people miss. Your brain also optimizes for continuity. It hates gaps in time as much as gaps in space. When you walk through a shadowy hallway, it doesn't redraw reality from scratch each step. It predicts the next moment from the last, and small errors get smoothed. But if a noise hits, or a draft brushes your neck, the prediction error spikes. Your system flips to search mode, scanning for causes. The fastest available cause in your library. Intruder, voice, presence wins. Think of a phone camera in low light. The image looks smeared, grainy, and the phone software over-sharpens edges, guessing what's there. Sometimes it nails it. Sometimes it hallucinates detail that never existed. Your brain does a biological version of that, and it's usually fantastic. But in haunted conditions, the sharpening is the story. There's also a social layer. If you walk into a place labeled haunted, your priors don't just come from experience, they're borrowed from culture. You're primed for agents, whispers, cold spots, prediction error from any source, HVAC rumble, floor vibration, a shifting shadow gets routed into ghost-shaped explanations. The surprise fades because the explanation fits the expectation. You literally experience less error because the story works. That subjective relief is convincing. Okay, but here's where it gets interesting. You're not passively filling in blanks, you're actively sampling the world to confirm your predictions. If you think there's someone behind you, you'll tilt your head, shift your stance, hold your breath. Those actions change your sensory input. Holding your breath amplifies your heartbeat. Tilting your head changes how echoes hit your ears. That new data can feel like confirmation, footsteps matching your pulse, a presence rising with your chest tightness. You didn't find evidence, you created it. Everything clicked when I realized this applies across senses. Visual ambiguity calls up faces. Auditory noise calls up voices. Bodily sensations call up presence. The brain isn't mixing them randomly. It's triangulating a single best explanation. If that explanation has a name, ghost, spirit, ancestor, it becomes sticky. Each new ambiguous sensation attaches to it, strengthening the belief and shrinking future errors. That's the loop that keeps believers believing without any deliberate self-deception. In other words, uncertainty hurts, so your brain rushes to solve it fast. Under weak input, the fastest solution is the one you already trust. That's efficient. It also explains why two people can stand in the same room and have different experiences. Their priors aren't the same. One expects drafts and old pipes, the other expects entities. They get different ghosts from the same noise. So what happens if we turn the sensory input way down, like way down, to starve the correction and let predictions run? That's not a thought experiment. There's a simple setup that does exactly this, and the results are startlingly consistent. If weak input amps up imagination, near zero input lets your brain's self-noise bloom into faces, whispers, and time doing strange things. Let's build that DIY hallucination lab next. The Ganzfeld effect, a DIY hallucination lab. Here's what most people miss. Hallucinations don't require illness or drugs. All you need is steady, unchanging sensory input. The brain craves contrast to correct its predictions. Remove contrast and your internal noise rises until it looks like signal. That's the Gansfeld effect, German for whole field. It turns your senses into a smooth, blank canvas and lets your brain paint. Okay, so basically, you create a uniform visual field and a uniform auditory field. Think of the eyes. They detect edges, flicker, and changes. Flood them with a soft featureless glow and the edge detectors starve. Think of the ears. They detect onsets, offsets, rhythm. Feed them white noise and they collect no clear events. With no external anchors, the brain's predictions stop getting corrected. The simple version is less sensory signal, more brain-generated content. Here's the DIY version people use. Cut a ping pong ball in half and tape the domes over closed or lightly closed eyes, so each eye sees a diffuse blur. Use a red light or a bright, even white lamp bounced off a wall so there are no shadows or sharp points. Put on headphones and pipe in steady white or pink noise at a comfortable, consistent level. Sit in a comfortable chair where you can stay still. Set a timer. 10 to 20 minutes is enough. And one more thing, start with a neutral mindset. Expectations shape what appears. This is a classic expectancy priming setup. The frame you carry and acts like a prior that sculpts the content. What typically happens? After a few minutes, most people report drifting patterns, swirls, grids, cascading dots. That's not magic. It's spontaneous activity in visual cortex, like the static you see when you close your eyes, amplified by the lack of real edges. Then faces emerge. Not crisp faces, but compelling impressions, eyes forming in the fog, a mouth, a person just out of reach. Auditory-wise, the hiss begins to carve itself into whispers or music you didn't play. Some feel a presence in the room or a touch on the arm that isn't there. Time loses its normal pacing, 5-minute stretches, 20 compresses. Here's the weird part. People often feel like something is trying to communicate. That's apophenia riding on top of the Gansfeld. Your brain is built to find agency. In a blank field, the slightest contour looks like intention. And when your inner voice floats inside the white noise, it can feel like it's coming from outside you. If you're primed for spirits, you'll call it a spirit. If you're primed for creativity, you'll call it inspiration. So why does the brain produce such vivid content? Think of cortex like a predictive engine with spontaneous chatter. In normal life, bottom-up sensory input clamps down on that chatter. In the Ganzfeld, the clamp loosens. Neurons in visual and auditory areas become more excitable relative to input, hyperexcitability in context, which lets top-down predictions bleed through. Your priors about faces, voices, and movement fill a uniform field, because those priors have the highest probability weight in ambiguous situations. Precision weighting, the brain's confidence setting on signals, shifts toward the internal model. Everything clicked when researchers borrowed this setup from parapsychology, where it originally popped up as a test for extrasensory perception, and refocused it on perception science. Remove the ESP claims, and the core phenomenon remains. People in the Ganzfeld routinely report rich, lifelike imagery and sounds without any external triggers beyond uniform stimulation. Replication studies, using controlled conditions, show elevated rates of complex hallucination-like experiences compared to normal resting states. The psychological picture ties together cortical excitability, reduced bottom-up precision, and top-down priors for faces and voices, plus apophenia that threads random fluctuations into meaningful messages. Here's what most people miss at home. Safety and setup matter. Don't block airflow, don't overheat with lamps, and don't crank the noise to damaging levels. Start with 10 minutes and build slowly. Some people find the effect unsettling. Mild anxiety, a sense of falling, or nausea can occur, especially if you're sleep deprived. If you feel dizzy or panicky, open your eyes fully, take off the headphones, and move. The effect fades quickly once contrast returns. Expectation is the steering wheel. If you tell yourself, "I'm going to see a ghost," your visual system will privilege human-like forms and threat signals. If you tell yourself, "I'm testing how my brain improvises," you'll tend to get abstract geometry, playful imagery, or neutral voices. Priming doesn't create the effect, it shapes its content. That's a crucial distinction. The Gansfeld turns up the volume on internally generated predictions. The story you bring tells those predictions what to look like. A micro-demo that helps, before you start, write down what you expect to experience. Afterward, write what you actually experienced. People are often surprised by the mismatch. The brain is generating, but it's also surprising you because different priors compete. Faces versus patterns, music versus whispers, presence versus emptiness, whichever wins changes moment to moment. That push-pull is your prediction system learning in real time from a starved world. Time distortion deserves a quick note. Without external events, no footsteps, no clock ticks, your internal timing relies on bodily rhythms and attention. In the Gansfeld, attention roams inward and outward without anchors. Bursts of vivid imagery compress time, dull stretches expand it. That's why artists and meditators sometimes use uniform field to access altered states. It's not mysticism, it's attention freed from constant correction. Here's a counterintuitive tip. Slight movement can amplify the sense of presence. When you shift your hand but can't see it, your brain predicts what the movement should look like. With the eyes flooded by uniform light, the expected visual change doesn't arrive, and that mismatch can feel like an external force blocking or touching you. That's a tiny, controlled version of felt presence, and it shows up fast in this setup. For credibility, strip away theatrics. Use neutral language. Log the session, and if you do it with a friend, avoid telling each other content until both have written notes. If you want to get clever, run 2 conditions on separate days. One where you're told some people encounter entities, and one where you're told some people see abstract shapes. Keep the equipment identical. Compare notes. You'll likely find the frequency of entity reports rises with the entity script, even though the sensory input was the same. Does this prove ghosts? No. It proves the brain is sufficient to produce ghost-like experiences under very basic constraints, homogeneous input, and heightened internal prediction. It doesn't rule out anything metaphysical, it just shows you don't need the metaphysical to get the feeling. And that matters because the feeling is what convinces people. One last caution, don't drive or operate anything risky right after a long session. Give your senses a few minutes to recalibrate. Step into normal light, listen to varied sounds, and let contrast wake up your correction systems again. Most effects decay within minutes. In other words, the Ganzfeld is a clean demonstration of how silence, sensory silence, makes your brain speak louder. With ping pong balls, white noise, and steady light, you can watch predictions take form as faces, hear patterns pretend to be voices, and feel time loosen. That's our no-input case. Now let's flip it and talk about input you can't hear that still makes you feel watched. Infrasound, a sound you don't hear but feel. Okay, so this is the part that sneaks up on you. There's a kind of sound that slips under your hearing but not under your skin. It's called infrasound, very low frequencies, roughly below 20 hertz. You don't hear it as a tone, you register it as unease. Think tight chest, hair on neck, vague dread, and sometimes a sense that someone's standing behind you. Why would a sound you can't hear feel like a presence? 2 reasons. First, your body is full of sensors that don't care about your ears. Your vestibular system in the inner ear, the mechanoreceptors in your skin, even the way your eyes stabilize. When big, slow pressure waves roll through a room, they push on all of that. Second, your threat detection system is tuned to anomalies, anything that shifts your internal state without a clear external cause. If your stomach flips and the air hums below awareness, your brain starts searching for a story. Presence fits fast. Here's a weird part people love to cite. Around 17 to 19 hertz is near some reported resonances in the eyeball and the tissues around it. The claim is that tiny vibrations at that frequency can add a faint blur or shimmer to vision, especially in low light, where your eyes are already straining. It's not a Hollywood wobble, it's a subtle instability that makes edges less trustworthy. Combine that with a room that already feels heavy, and you're halfway to a ghost. Everything clicked for a lot of investigators after one famous case. An engineer named Vic Tandy was working late in a lab that felt haunted. He'd get chills, feel watched, and one night he reportedly saw a gray figure in the corner of his eye. The next day, he noticed a foil blade clamped in a vise was vibrating for no obvious reason. He tracked it to an industrial fan producing a strong, low-frequency standing wave in the room, around 18.9 hertz. When the fan was fixed, the figure and the dread vanished. In other words, the ghost had a mechanical soundtrack. Now, does that mean every haunted house is pulsing at 18 hertz? No. Here's what actually happens. Lots of built environments naturally generate low-frequency energy. Big fans, HVAC ducts, elevators, subways, traffic rumble, distant storms. Even wind across a long corridor can set up standing waves. If the geometry of the room is just right, think long dimensions and hard surfaces, those waves can amplify at specific spots. You walk into a cold corner, and it's not supernatural. It's physics and air. The body side matters. Low-frequency vibration can cause vestibular mismatch, your balance system getting input that doesn't line up with what your eyes see. That mismatch is a recipe for nausea, anxiety, and a need to explain why you suddenly feel wrong. Meanwhile, your autonomic system interprets these shifts as possible threat and nudges your heart rate and sweat glands. That nudge feeds back as I'm scared, even if nothing obvious is happening. Threat false positives go up because your system would rather overreact than miss a real danger. Here's what most people miss. Even when you can measure infrasound in a space, reports of haunt-like feelings depend on context. In controlled studies, adding a low-frequency component to music at live events increased reports of chills, unease, and strangeness, but not everyone noticed, and few people said ghost. In old buildings with a spooky reputation, the same physical sensation gets a supernatural label. Expectation shapes interpretation, but the physical push is real. This is classic attribution. Ambiguous arousal seeks a cause, and priming supplies a story. So how do you test a room without turning into a gadget collector? Start simple. If you have access, use a basic sound level meter or an app pair with a decent external mic, then look for energy below 20 hertz. Many mics roll off down there, so take the numbers as rough. More practically, hunt for sources. Is there a large fan, extractor, or compressor nearby? Do ducts rattle at certain speeds? Does the sensation come and go on a cycle every few minutes when a system kicks in? Turn devices off one by one and see if the mood shifts. If you can't control the room, change your position. Stand in different spots, especially near corners or halfway along long walls. Infrasound can form nodes and antinodes, areas of minimal and maximal pressure variation. If one spot makes your chest feel tight and another feels neutral, that's a clue you're walking through a wave pattern, not a haunting. Use your body as a sensor, couple it with observations you can verify. I once toured a haunted basement with a guide who swore the back room caused migraines. In the hallway, I felt fine. 3 steps into the room, the air turned heavy and my stomach dipped. On the ceiling, a huge ducked elbow with a variable speed blower. When it ramped up, the floor subtly rumbled. When it dropped, the feeling faded. Nobody needed to say ghost for the experience to feel convincing. In other words, the sensation was real. The label was optional. There's a caution I need to flag. Not all correlations are causes, and not every low frequency is infrasound. Vibrations you feel through the floor or chair can prime your system in the same way. Also, the famous eyeball resonance at 19 Hz gets repeated a lot, but the evidence is mixed. The safer claim is that low-frequency energy can disturb vision and bounce indirectly, which is enough to tilt perception. Keep your language honest. Possible contributor, not smoking gun. Want a quick hack? If a space feels haunted, step outside for a minute and reset. Take a few slow breaths, then re-enter with earplugs. Earplugs don't block infrasound well, but they change your perception of the room and reduce higher frequency distractions. If you're on these drops with the HVAC off or spikes when the subway passes, you've got a lead. If it's the same no matter what, look to expectation and lighting next. Here's the counterintuitive part. Silence can amplify infrasound's effect. In a quiet building at night, the low rumble has less competition. Your brain can't anchor the feeling to obvious sound sources, so it searches for agents instead. Add a rumor about a tragic past, and the story locks in. Remove the rumor, fix the fan, and suddenly the entity loses interest. Practical wrap-up. Test for drafts that cause doors to creak and windows to vibrate. Those can create low-frequency rattles. Check for loose fixtures that buzz at specific blower speeds. Ask building staff about mechanical schedules. If you're running an investigation, log timestamps. Later, line them up with HVAC cycles or nearby train timetables. Patterns beat hunches. So sound you can't hear can still push your body, scramble your balance, and nudge your mind toward presence. Sound and silence both trick us. Once those bottom-up nudges are in place, the brain's top-down stories do the rest.